What's up, guys? This is the Last Word Podcast. This is Nick D. Ray, Scott Gevertz, and today we have a special guest, Graydon Smith. Today we will be talking about what went wrong for the Clippers and what they need to improve on for next year. Scott, would you like to start us off?
Sure thing, Nick. So, this was a really devastating, tragic loss for the Clippers in Game 7. But the truth is, people say a lot of times, hey, in the NBA, you see the best team win in the playoffs because it's a best-of-7 series, right? Most likely, the better team will win 4 out of the 7 games. And the weird thing is, there really wasn't a game that the Nuggets won, other than I think Game 3, was it? Game 2, where the Nuggets just dominated the whole way. The last 3 games, they were down 3-1, right? Games 5, 6, and 7. The Clippers had leads of, I think, 17, 19, and 12 points. 16 points in Game 5, 19 points in Game 6, and 12 points in Game 7. So all 3 of those games, when people say, the Nuggets matched up better with them, the Nuggets were the better team, the Clippers had double-digit leads in all 3 of those games. The problem is the Clippers had no chemistry. They had no finishing mentality. It was like they were just a bunch of really good players, put together. And there was not a team, Because you look at it, and it's like none of the guys relied on each other. The more that the game broke down, the offense was just give the ball to Kawhi on the wing, let him try to ISO up, go to work. And the Nuggets would just double-team him, and he'd pass out of it. And, he hit Paul George for a 3, clank, that's a brick. Throw it to Marcus Morris, clank, that's a brick. Kick it to Lou Williams, who would do some ISO, get his own shot, brick. Okay, Montrezl Harrell was just getting fouled, shooting 60% at the line. Nothing was working for these guys. And the truth is, Kawhi Leonard was pathetic in Game 7. It was really terrible. But over the course of the series, Kawhi played well. Other than Game 3 and 7, he still averaged 24, 8.5, and 6, while also leading his team in steals and blocks. So he led the Clippers in points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks, all 5 major statistical categories. He shot 44% from 3, 44% from the field, 36% from 3, 87% at the line. Those aren't bad numbers, In Game 7, what happened was Kawhi's shot wasn't falling. When the lights got big, pressure was on. He was missing his jumpers, those classic mid-range jumpers that he's iconic for. He started missing them, and then he had to rely on the rest of his teammates, who all series long had kind of just been riding with Kawhi, and they all showed up small too. It was brick after brick after brick. Paul George was hitting the side of the backboard on 3s. Lou Williams was 4 of 27 on 3-pointers in the series. Him and Montrezl just never seemed to find a rhythm after they came back into the bubble.
Yeah, that's facts. If you look at Kawhi Leonard in that final game, he shot 6 of 22. But then you look at freaking Paul George. He shot 4 of 16 in the clutch time when it was starting to get, even though they were already getting blown out. He hits the side of the backboard on a corner 3, which I don't even see as possible. He was just straight up brick after brick this series. He shot 2 of 11 from 3. And this series, what they really did was they kind of just left. They guarded Kawhi, obviously. They guarded him really hard and really well. They double-teamed him the entire series. And what they said was, all the other guys, you have to beat us, not Kawhi. It's not going to be Kawhi to make this shot. It's going to be Paul George, it's going to be Lou Will, it's going to be Montrezl. And they just couldn't hold their own at all. So something is definitely wrong with this team. Graydon, what do you have to say about this?
I think that they just didn't really have a true offense. Kawhi Leonard led the team in assists. They never, Patrick Beverley was their point guard. He's not a true point guard. He's just out there for his defense. They don't have anyone to facilitate the offense like the Nuggets did and Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. So let's just give it to Kawhi, let him go ISO. Give it to Lou Will, Paul George, Montrezl Harrell, let them go ISO. And unfortunately, that didn't work in the second halves and fourth quarters of most of the games. Over the series, Kawhi Leonard shot 27% in the fourth quarter. That's not going to win you a championship.
Never. Yeah.
You're 100% right, man.
What Kawhi did this series was prove that he is not the best player in the world right now. I mean,
100% agree.
That title has to go to LeBron right now. I can't put it to Giannis.
Yeah.
Giannis got blown out in the second round by a team he shouldn't have lost to. You can't give it to KD and Curry, obviously, because they're injured and not currently playing, so I'm not going to give it to them right
Kevin
now.
Durant, and I mean no disrespect when I say this, he's never really proven that he can win a championship as
For
the
sure.
number one guy on a team, except those 2 years with Golden State when he had probably the most loaded team in NBA history.
But there is one guy, time and time again, that is always just consistently great, and that's LeBron James. LeBron James shows up in big games, and I can't say that after this Kawhi series. I mean, this series for Kawhi. Kawhi just absolutely got dominated Game 7. He couldn't score in the fourth quarter. There was just a lot wrong with Kawhi's game this series.
Yeah, the truth of it is, Nick, or go ahead, Greg.
He couldn't score in the fourth quarter. He didn't score. He scored 2 points the entire second half, and didn't score any points the last part of the first half. They just couldn't score. 1 of 11 shooting. It's not good.
Yeah, that's garbage. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the sad thing is, Paul George, right? We know who Paul George is. This is not the first time that Paul George has done this.
Exactly.
Nobody was shocked by how bad and way off he played. And look, Paul George is ultra talented. He's long, he's versatile on defense, he can shoot the three ball well, he can pass a little bit, he can rebound, he can get to the rack, but he has just zero clutch gene. Okay, it's just, I mean, he had, Nick, you mentioned he was 4 of 16 with 10 points. I think you forgot to mention he had 5 turnovers. Okay?
Yeah.
He has done this time and time again. Last year, elimination game against the Blazers, he was bad. Damian Lillard hit the game-winning 3 in his face. Waved him goodbye. The year before, they played the Utah Jazz, and Pandemic P showed up 2 years early, scoring 6 points.
Dude, Joe Ingles
Game
just
6
destroyed
elimination
him that
game.
series.
6 points. I mean, he is a guy who is one season removed from being third place in MVP voting, the third best player in the league. He was pushing for that tier. But in these big moments, he doesn't show up. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we know who Paul George is and we know what Paul George does. And Paul George was worse in the first round against the Mavericks than he was in the second round, yet the Clippers still managed to win that series in 6. So I think the brunt of the blame for Game 7 has to fall on the shoulders of Kawhi Leonard, like you guys said. Paul George didn't show up, which he hasn't been. And the guys around him, like Lou Will and Montrezl Harrell, never seemed to find a rhythm once they re-entered the bubble. But Kawhi Leonard was pretty much good enough in the rest of the series when he was on to win them 3 games. In Game 5, in the fourth quarter, when they got outscored and lost that game, the first part of the 3-1 comeback, it was really unfortunate because Kawhi had 13 points in the fourth quarter, which was great. But it wasn't enough. The Nuggets escaped with a close victory, and then after that it was like the floodgates had been opened, and everything just washed out and the Clippers got demolished because, like you said, from that point on, Kawhi was worthless in the fourth quarter. He was 6 of 22 in Game 7, and we need Kawhi to step up. He's the kind of guy who you say, okay, he's going to take over in the fourth quarter of a game. He's one of the best players in the world. We can trust him to be at his best in the biggest moments. And he just didn't do that in Game 7, and so they got annihilated.
And Paul George actually had a pretty great series before this game. I mean, he was averaging 24, which is, it's solid. It's not superstar level at that, but 6 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, but his efficiencies were phenomenal. I mean, he was shooting 47% from the field. He was shooting 43% from 3 and 91% from the free throw line. Like, he was having a great series, and then that Game 7, he just was awful. He was garbage.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just think that most of the team didn't want to be there. Like, Lou Will had to be persuaded last minute to join the team in the bubble. Montrezl Harrell had to leave because his grandma died or something. And then the team didn't want to play in protest. And I think that they mentally just checked out and didn't want to play.
Yeah, for sure.
And I couldn't agree with you more, man. They didn't have the mentality of a champion. The whole year it was kind of like, hey, we can just turn it on when we need to. We're not really going to try. I'm going to tell you, next year, there's not going to be any load managing. There's not going to be any playing around and playing 5 different lineups. Okay, this is going to be serious, man, because they just choked on the highest of levels. It was ultimately embarrassing because, like you said, it just seemed like they didn't care. They weren't in it. And all year long, all the analysts would point to a 6-minute stretch in a regular season game where, they just locked down some random team.
Yeah.
Oh, see, that's the Clippers at their best. That's the Clippers but they never seem to be able to play a full 48 minutes at their best.
Exactly.
And the truth is, you said it best, Greg, they're checked out. There were reports coming in Game 7 that at the end of the game, the Clippers' best players were tired. They were exhausted. They couldn't play because they
couldn't play more than 3 minutes.
Yeah, they didn't take care of their bodies over the quarantine period. And so the truth is, this is a team that really just didn't care, didn't have the desire to win. Because the truth is, when people say the Nuggets were the better team, the Nuggets had the better matchup with Jokic, which is a fair point that they didn't have anyone to guard Jokic, and we'll get to that later. But ultimately, okay, if you're up 17 points, you don't need to outplay them for 48 minutes. You just need to close, okay? You just need to be tough down the stretch and make shots in key moments. And none of that happened for the Clippers. 3 games in a row. It's not a coincidence. This is a team with a weak mentality, and we were deceived all year long by everyone telling us that they were dogs, or gritty, and they were mentally tough. They weren't mentally tough. They just had some players that were good at defense, so it seemed like it.
Yeah, like, for example, CJ actually, I thought this was pretty hilarious. He tweeted that the Clippers looked like they had packed before the game. Like, they were already ready to leave before the game even started. Which, I mean, it really looked like it. The Clippers got off to an early lead, but by the end of the game, they were just done, And I think a big part of not being able to actually stay in the game at the end of the game was, one, load managing. I don't think you'll see an NBA player load manage at all next year, which is what you guys said. And two, because of this quarantine. I mean, they really did not want to stay in shape and keep on moving. This is absolutely not a team that I would trust. I mean, especially after you trade Paul George for 5 picks, Shai Gilgeous, who's playing phenomenal on OKC, and Danilo Gallinari. Yeah, for sure. I mean, Paul George has been disappointing. Kawhi just underperformed in the big moments. Lou Williams was just not good this series. I mean, I don't know what was wrong with him this series, but he just wasn't there. Montrez is too short to play defense on Jokic. That's another thing. I think he's like, what, 6'8"?
Montrez is all heart and hustle.
Exactly.
He's just not big enough.
What is he, like 6'8", right?
He's really closer to 6'6", 6'7".
Yeah, and he averaged like 3 rebounds this series. He just wasn't in the
2.6 rebounds.
Yeah,
even 3.
Which is
That's
ridiculous.
not going to get you a max contract.
Yeah, Jokic just dominated him the entire series.
Yeah, what did Jokic have, like 25 rebounds in Game 7?
Yeah.
He had like 18 going into the fourth quarter.
Ridiculous.
So you guys brought it up. From a purely basketball standpoint, the Clippers did not match up super well with the Nuggets because the Nuggets' best player, Nikola Jokic, is a patient, skilled offensive big man, and the only true big man that the Clippers had was Ivica Zubac. And I like Big Zoo. He plays hard, he can rebound a little bit, he can rim defend, but Jokic is too skilled. Maybe Big Zoo could play well against Rudy Gobert, who's just a dunker and a rim protector, but with Jokic, right, you saw him splashing those threes. There was that one iconic one where he stepped back off one foot. Right, if you leave him open, he's going to knock down threes. He hits all those kind of goofy floaters and everything. It's the weirdest looking shot, but he makes them, man.
Yeah.
And so they really had no answer for Jokic.
It was the Sombor shuffle, man. That move is unguardable. I mean, he shot 40% from 3 in this series, which is ridiculous. I mean, if you take a look at, for example, Lou Williams, who's a great he's a great shooter. He shot 15% from 3. I mean, their best shooter was Marcus Morris. What'd you say?
He was 4 of 27 from 3 on the series.
Which is just awful. And their best shooter was Marcus Morris. And Marcus Morris actually played much better than like at the end of the season. He didn't look like he was fitting well with this team, but he actually had a pretty...
He caught on in the playoffs.
Yeah, he had a pretty decent playoff so far. Yeah.
I think, Nick, you brought up the point. They traded away Shai, Danilo, and 5 picks for Paul George. this team, like we kind of mentioned at the start, hey, what can this team do to get better? They can't do much.
Yeah.
That's the frightening thing is they've got all this money locked up in Kawhi and Paul George, who are great players, but who did not look like they were capable of winning a championship this year. They don't have the money or the assets to go out and get a true big man rim defender, who can also kind of guard the more versatile big men, which will hurt them against guys like Kristaps, Jokic, and Anthony Davis, big men who can shoot, all in the Western Conference that they're going to have to get through. But at the same time, like you said also, Montrezl Harrell's a pending free agent. He's probably going to be gone, and he was kind of the heart and soul of this team. And they're probably going to bring back Marcus Morris and just kind of make him into an even bigger role. But at the end of the day, is Marcus Morris and is just subtracting Montrezl Harrell? Is that going to make them a better team next year in the playoffs? Mm-hmm. I don't think so. Lou Williams is going to get older. I mean, this is not a good-looking situation for these guys.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I think I've been hearing a lot about they're thinking about exploring trading, and I forgot who was it. Was it Kendrick Perkins that mentioned that they might split up the team? I think Kendrick Perkins is the one, but you can't always trust Perk. But but what I was thinking was maybe something with Paul George to the Nets, and the reason why I say that was one, it would make the Nets a cheat code. But I mean, you could probably get like Karis LeVert and Jared Allen, and I think those two players would actually fit better for the system. Put Kawhi at the 3, and then.
But I don't think the Clippers would do that because Jared Allen presents the same problem as Ivica Zubac, where he can't really guard.
Well, I mean, he's a pretty dang good defender, rim defender.
No, great rim defender, but he can't guard Jokic, Porzingis, and Anthony Davis at the 3-point line, which is where Zubac struggled, is because he's slow. He's a rim defender, and they could pull it out and play on the perimeter.
Mm-hmm. True, but you never know. I think Paul George isn't right for this team, but they might give it another shot next year. I don't see any immediate player that they can just pick up and it would solve all the problems. I really do think that they need to try and explore trade options, but it seems like I just can't really think of one solution for this team. I think you need a big man that's mobile is one, to go guard out in the perimeter and guard in the post against guys like Jokic, which is ridiculously hard to find. I mean, we talked about Whiteside a little bit earlier, and Whiteside can't guard out in the perimeter, and Jokic would have feasted on him if he was to play him on this series. He would just, and the other thing is that he's just a block in the paint, and I think this Clippers team needs better passers as well. I mean, didn't they have like 8? I think it was they had 8 assists in the entire second half, and Jokic had 8 assists in the second half as well by himself.
They really don't have any natural passers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Kawhi Leonard's become a pretty good passer, but he's giving you like 5 assists per game, which is good for a small forward. But he's not going to facilitate your offense as a playmaker.
For sure.
He's a scorer and a defender. Paul George is not an exceptional passer. I mean, Marcus Morris, Lou Williams, again, just scorers. They really have no true point guard like Grayson you said.
And Pat Bev is a meh passer, but he's not like good at passing.
Yeah. He's more of a defensive guy.
Yeah, so I think what you got to do for this team is you got to find a passer and someone that could hit those big buckets, especially from the 3-point line, because Lou Will was just garbage this series. And then you also got to look for a center that can move his feet a little bit.
Yeah, all that is great, but I think ultimately winning playoff series and winning championships comes down to your stars getting buckets in the fourth quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the Clippers could win a championship next year or in the future with Paul George as their second option?
Yeah, the only way I see it is if LeBron James' age starts to show next year, which unfortunately for the Clippers, there have been no signs of that happening, right? And the Lakers essentially become less of a threat. Then the team that they'd have to beat again is probably Denver and maybe Brooklyn in the finals.
And maybe the Warriors, if the Warriors come back strong.
The Warriors. And they match up well with the Warriors.
Yeah,
and that's
true.
Because they have perimeter defense.
And a lot of
but
forwards.
Again, the Nuggets, the Nuggets are a young team. They're just going to get better. Michael Porter Jr. has star potential. It's a rough matchup for him. And like you said, Graydon, Kawhi Leonard was the steady force on this team. He was the guy who down the stretch would make shots. And if he's not doing that, nobody else is doing anything for this team. Paul George has he just can't do it. That's just not who he is. It's the unfortunate truth of the situation. This team's entire identity was compromised when Paul George and Kawhi Leonard showed up. Because last year, this team was the little engine that could, right? They were all heart, all hustle, fighting everybody. You know, they came back from like a 30-point deficit to beat the Warriors in the playoffs, remember? You know, it was incredible. Obviously, they lost the series. They were not as good of a team.
Pushed the Warriors to 6 games, which was pretty great.
They fought hard. And now they get in Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Two guys who are a little bit injury-prone, who are kind of resting and load managing, little lackadaisical, don't really show up at practice all the time, you know. And it was working fine because they just have such an incredible collection of talent. Yeah. But then once they met a team that actually had, you know, a similar amount of talent, a team that was better coached, a team that was a better finisher, right, and a team that had actual chemistry down the stretch, ran an offense, had players who relied on each other, they really had no answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the reason why the Nuggets played so well was because they were just always moving the ball around, and they could get easy buckets on the inside with Jokic and easy buckets on the outside with Jamal Murray, because Jokic would collapse the defense a little bit, and then it would ease off the perimeter scores on the Nuggets, which was kind of a big deal because, I mean, it really allowed them to get buckets anywhere on the court. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the Clippers, they need a true point guard that can really facilitate and set up the offense instead of having everyone on the Clippers just go ISO every possession.
Do you think they should go after Chris Paul?
I don't think they have the cap for that.
That's true.
Money.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they can sign Rondo. Like, they have no money.
They don't have any money. Yeah.
Maybe they could trade Paul George for Chris Paul.
Yeah, OKC's not going to take Paul George.
Give us Chris Paul and our 5 picks back. Oh, God, that would be hilarious.
It would. And I think their mentality throughout the playoffs and the entire season, I think that honestly needs to be put on Kawhi. Because from the start of the year, he came in and said, I'm not going to play this amount of games. I'm not going to show up to this amount of practices. So the whole team just had this mindset of, okay, I can coach through the entire season and just compete when it's time to play the Lakers. Mm-hmm. But that didn't work. And they need to have a stronger mentality throughout the entire year.
Mm-hmm. And I think that Mavs series kind of put them off their confidence. Because, I mean, this Mavs team actually competed with them. I mean, like, they were actually pulling it close pretty much every game.
The Mavs could have won. Kristaps played all of
these. If Kristaps had played, they totally could have won that series. So I think that kind of threw them off their mindset of that we're going to go in this and we're going to win this series and we're going to win this championship at the end of the day. You know,
Nick, I slightly disagree with you there. I don't think they were swayed from their confidence because they got up 3-1 on the Nuggets immediately.
That's true.
They jumped out to a quick start and beaten them. I think ultimately the problem, and Braden said it, is Kawhi Leonard came in and set this tone of, hey, we don't have to try against the teams that are not as talented as us. Mm-hmm. And a team like the Mavericks, I don't think it swayed their confidence, but I think it showed us a little bit of a precursor, like, hey, the Mavericks are a really talented team. Mm-hmm. Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis have the potential to be one of the best duos in the NBA.
For sure.
And when the Clippers play a team who's similar to them in talent, they tend to get out-hustled, they tend to get out-finished down the stretches of games, if that makes sense. And so, when the Nuggets did it, it was kind of like the extension of this is the Mavericks team if Porzingis didn't get injured.
Yeah.
They got their guys healthy, and they just beat them down the stretches of games.
Mm-hmm. I
think their confidence over the last couple of games just depleted more and more after Denver came back from each lead. And in Game 5, Kawhi scored 13 points in the last 13 minutes. That's great, and they lost, but that's really good. And then in the last 20 minutes of Game 6, he scored 9 points. And then in the last 27 minutes, he scored 2 points. Kawhi Leonard's confidence just went down and down.
For sure.
And he stopped shooting his mid-ranger at the end of Game 7, too. He just kept trying to drive it into the paint and get a foul call. Yeah, wasn't working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think they just had a lot of possessions on defense where they just didn't care. I remember I was watching the game. it was a close game. I think the Clippers were up 3, and Kawhi Leonard just stood there as Jamal Murray ran around the screen and had a wide open 3, and 3 free points for the Nuggets.
You know, it seemed like all year long, the only team that the Clippers could really get excited for was the Lakers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they would have had a good chance of beating the Lakers if they had played them.
I think they're a better
Because
matchup,
they match up well with LeBron James, and for whatever reason, they hate the Lakers, but in a weird way, they respect their talent. And so they try against them. But I think the Clippers had a certain level of arrogance where they said, if you're not the Lakers, you're not talented enough to beat us, we're not going to take you seriously.
Mm. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, do you guys have anything else to say?
No, I'm good, man.
I think that's about it.
Well, as you guys just heard, the Clippers had a tragic defeat in Game 7, blowing a 3-1 series lead to the Denver Nuggets and getting eliminated in the second round after an offseason that saw them become instant title favorites. So, we just kind of broke down the whole series for you, what we thought what the Clippers should do going forward, how the situation looks, and we'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Let us know in the comment section below. Do you think the Clippers can win a title with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard? Do you think they need to move one of those pieces? Should they try to create some cap space? Are they going to re-sign Montrez? What's going to go on here? You tell us. We'll be glad to hear some opinions from you guys. As always, thank you for watching the Last Word Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Caverts, here with Nick D. Ray and special guest Greg Smith. This has been The Last Word.